I want to talk about, you mentioned the VC firm, you mentioned moving to New York. I mean, New York is one of the grittiest places ever. And if you're in tech, you're in startups, you're a female, it is very, very difficult. I spent a short time in New York. I've worked actually in the startup tech space a little bit. So respect to you for what you've done, what you've cultivated. So I just want to hear about that experience, and then kind of as a part two, how that mentality has then bled into becoming an Olympic gold medalist.
Yeah, it's interesting. I moved to New York and I was working in venture capital. And so my job as an analyst was to source new investment deals for the firm. And so I was on the phone, 6 hours a day with entrepreneurs talking about their business, what was their revenue, what was their growth rate, what was their competition, what was their secret advantage, how defensible was it, and all these different, what are their gross margins, like all of these questions. And it was really intellectually fun for me because I was learning like what makes a great business. And for me, I had always wanted to start my own business one day, and so I was learning so much about kind of what went into that. But the flip side of it was, the other amazing thing was that these entrepreneurs were sacrificing so much to go pursue their dreams. Like they had left their jobs to go start a company. They had this idea, this dream that they wanted to make happen, and they were going to do it. And they were facing a lot of adversity because there were a lot of investors who said, they got a lot of rejections in their fundraising process. And so for me, I spent 4.5 years working with these entrepreneurs in that environment where I was watching people who'd sacrificed everything to go pursue a dream, to go make something happen, despite the odds. There's 5-10% chance max that a startup succeeds, and yet they were still willing to do it. And so at the end of 4.5 years, I'd spent all this time with the entrepreneurs, and I was like, wow, I'm in this industry because I want to support entrepreneurs pursuing their dreams. And here I am on the other side of the table, too afraid to go pursue mine. And it was this really aha moment for me where I realized like I could spend the rest of my life in that role where I'm supporting other people, but kind of not walking the talk, like not living it myself. And if I didn't have a dream that was put to the wayside, maybe it wouldn't have bothered me so much. But because I had this Olympic dream that was just like burning in my mind, I was like, how can I sit here and advocate for this, promote these startups when I'm sitting here not doing what I'm preaching? And so I think that really influenced me eventually to leave my job because A, I was influenced and inspired by all these entrepreneurs, but B, I realized that I kind of had to have the integrity to go do what I was promoting myself,
Dang.
I know. That's so fascinating to hear about. And another thing I've heard you talk about too, which I think is so cool, because one of the things I loved when I was listening to your story is I found a lot of similarities between swimming and cycling. And I loved when you talk about this idea with both your history in VC and then moving into cycling was sort of this idea of delayed gratification, right? Of like in VC, when you're investing in a startup, you may not know for 5, 6, 7 years, like whether or not that's going to be successful. And that was a huge help for you as you started this journey in cycling because you knew nothing was going to happen overnight. Like this was going to be a long game, long process. So talk to us a little bit about, you actually find that really motivating, that process of knowing that there's a lot in front of you and that you do have a lot to learn.
Yeah, I think VC definitely taught me to be patient. I mean, I'll be honest, when I was never a patient person growing up. I was like, I want to see results now, and I hated waiting. I hated, the long game. And I think in VC, it's true. You invest in a company, and even whether you're an analyst or a partner at any phase you are, you don't really know how good you are until years later. And because it's an industry where you have to make a lot of contrarian bets, you might invest in something and other people really disagree with you. And you might think, oh, I'm not good at this because I disagree with other people. But then 7 years down the road, it's successful and you're the genius that saw it when no one else did. And so it's this industry that can be really bizarre because you can't really look to validation from other people to know if you're successful or not. And because it's an industry where there are a lot of contrarian bets that end up doing really well. And so for me, I sourced some really good deals. They've been super successful, but it was hard to know that in the very beginning. And so I had to learn how to be comfortable without immediate feedback. And I learned how to kind of assess how I was doing based on how much I was learning, whether I really believed in what I was doing, whether I believed in the companies. And what it taught me was that I had to have conviction in my own ideas, because there was no one to really give me an answer on whether I was right or not. And so I had to learn, why do I believe in this? Why do I trust my intuition? And, I was in a room, I'll give one example. Like the first company I ever sourced was called Restaurant 365. And it was a restaurant software business. And the restaurant industry historically has been totally, not something VCs are interested in, because restaurants often fail. It's a very fragmented industry. It's not really seen as something that's venture backed. And I had grown up in the restaurant industry in my parents' restaurant and hotel. I'd been working in the restaurant as a busser, bussing tables. My mom was in the accounting office, always frustrated by clunky restaurant software. And so I'd had that background. And then I went into VC and I was like, I really see this as an opportunity because I know it firsthand. And a lot of the VCs around me were skeptical because they said, oh, the restaurant industry is not, venture backable. There's not a lot of companies, in the restaurant industry that have become unicorns. Like it's not really something we invest in. And so as a young 23, 24-year-old, I had to be in a room with a bunch of partners who were twice my age, way more experienced than me. Many of them had worked in venture longer than I'd been alive. And here I was trying to advocate for something totally foreign to the industry, and then trust that I had insight that these superstars in VC didn't have. And so from a young age, from a young professional age, I had to learn to really trust the knowledge that I had, the background that I had, and build conviction in my ideas, and then stand up for them to people who maybe didn't have that same background as I did. And so I think for me, that experience also taught me, I had to be really thorough with my research. I had to be really diligent. But then in the end, if I had a gut intuition, I had to follow it and I had to stand up for it. And later, when I left my job to go pursue cycling full time, it was a very similar experience where no one knew what cycling was in my friends or family. There was no cycling on TV. There was no Women's Tour de France at the time. There was barely any money. I made $7,000 stipend my first year as a quote salary. And so it was just there was no one who had the conviction in my plan that I did. And I think from a young professional age, having to sit in a boardroom and advocate for my ideas, being, the young, inexperienced one, and then a few years later having to do the same thing and trust my intuition when the people around me told me I was wrong. I think I only had that confidence because I had to have built it over 4 years of standing up for my ideas.
And was that all driven from you and experiences, and as you mentioned, kind of your upbringing, or did you lean on others? Just because I'll speak from my own experience, that self-doubt and that, having that conviction in a room full of people being like, no, you're young, you don't, that's so hard to overcome. How did you do that? How did you walk through that?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of a few things. I think the first, definitely my background growing up in Alaska. My parents had moved to Alaska when they were 22 years old. There were no cell phones, no internet. They had carved a very unconventional life for themselves, and they had done really well, and they had raised, great kids, and their restaurant was now doing really well. And so I'd seen an unconventional path can actually lead to a lot of success, fulfillment, and happiness. And my parents love what they do. They're really happy. But they did it in a very different way from a lot of their peers when they graduated college. And so I think I had learned from a really young age that you can build a life for yourself that's different, and it can be very successful, and you can be very happy. And so that definitely influenced me, having my parents as my role models growing up, because they embodied a lot of that. And then the second thing was I had been in an industry of entrepreneurs where every entrepreneur had a significant chance of failure, much higher chance of failure than success. And yet there were winners, there were unicorns that I was working with. And so I had been exposed to people who'd gone against the grain and been successful. And so I think it was this combination of just throughout my life, I had been exposed to people who had a 10% chance of success, who had the grit, who had the determination, who had the conviction, who had trusted their intuition and gone with it and never gave up and then made it. And so having seen that and witnessed it firsthand, and I'm really up close, both with my parents and with these entrepreneurs, I said, okay, well, it's possible, and there might be something here where everyone's telling me I'm wrong, but maybe I could be right. And it also taught me how to do the thorough diligence that I needed to do. When I left my job, I wasn't doing it blindly. I had talked to other people who had worked in the professional cycling world. I had talked to professional athletes. I had asked, what is the potential for salary? What is the life like? I had gone to Europe and raced for 2 months. So I kind of knew what I was getting into. I had done research on my power numbers and on my, looked at my results and figured out, okay, do I have the strength that it takes to succeed as a professional athlete? And so I learned, how to do all the research and diligence that I needed to build that confidence in my decision, but then also how to kind of build comfort standing up for that conviction when no one else did. So I think it was a combination of de-risking and diligencing, but then also having the confidence to move forward.